Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to see you all here today. And thank you for those who reminded me that the invitation didn't go out the first time. So last time we started talking about a book entitled "The Sayings of Layman Pang." Layman Pang, who lived in the 8th century into the 9th century in China. And as the title indicates, who was a layman, a Buddhist practitioner. And we talked about how one of his friends, who was sort of high in government, um, after Layman Pang's death, recorded all of these encounters that the layman had with various teachers and other people, so that we can benefit from them today. And of course, we wouldn't have been able to benefit from them without the people who spent the time and effort to translate them into English. And there are two translations, only two. They differ somewhat from one to another, and we'll get into that. Last time we talked about an encounter that Layman Pang had with Shito, a noted Buddhist teacher, a Chan teacher, Chan being the Chinese word for the Japanese word Zen, a noted Chan teacher of the time. And there is one other encounter that is recorded in this text. And we'll talk about that today, one other encounter with Shito. And I think I'll start just by reading the two translations. The first translation by Ruth Fuller Sasaki and others, and the second one by James Green. One day, Shito said to the layman, "Since seeing me, what have your daily activities been?" "When you ask me about my daily activities, I can't open my mouth," the layman replied. "Well, it's just because I know you are thus, I now ask you," said Shito. Whereupon the layman offered this verse: "My daily activities are not unusual. I'm just naturally in harmony with them, grasping nothing, discarding nothing. In every place, there's no hindrance, no conflict. Who assigns the ranks of vermilion and purple? The hills and mountains' last speck of dust is extinguished. My supernatural power and marvelous activity, drawing water and carrying firewood." Shito gave his assent. Then he asked, "Will you put on the black robes or will you continue wearing white?" "I want to do what I like," replied the layman. So he did not shave his head or dye his clothing. Traditionally, monastics wore black. Lay people, especially the working class, wore white. And the high government officials would wear robes of vermilion or purple. Mm. James Green translates this quite a bit differently. And it's fortunate for us because we can compare the two and try to come to greater understanding. One day, Chiteau said, "I've come to visit you. What have you been doing?" The layman said, "If you're asking what I do every day, there's nothing to say about it." Chiteau said, "What did you think you were doing before I asked you about it?" The layman made up a verse. "What I do every day is nothing special. I simply stumble around. What I do is not thought out. Where I go is unplanned. No matter who tries to leave their mark, the hills and dales are not impressed. Collecting firewood and carrying water are prayers that reach the gods." Chiteau, approving, said, "So, are you going to wear black or white?" The layman said, "I will do whatever is best." It came to pass that he never shaved his head to join the Sangha. So I think we'll focus on this little verse that is well known in Zen literature, particularly the last two lines. The verse has basically four couplets, and we'll talk about them one at a time. The first couplet in the Fuller translation: "My daily activities are not unusual. I'm just naturally in harmony with them." And James Green: "What I do every day is nothing special." What I do every day is nothing special. It strikes me how different those translations are. And I think, as best I can determine, uh, Ruth Fuller Sasaki, that translation is the more literal. And James Green has taken effort to try to make it a little bit more comprehensible. But I think it probably goes back and forth a certain amount because translation involves trying to be literal at the same time, trying to be comprehensible to modern readers. But and I don't intend to say, well, it really means this. What I'm wanting to do today is just share some thoughts that I had upon reading these passages. And that first couplet, what comes to mind for me is the notion of it's not so much what you're doing, but how you're doing it. Not so much what you're doing, but how you're doing it. Whether you're giving it attention, whether you're giving it your full attention as you're performing a task, whatever that task may be. It's easy for attention to drift. This morning, we're working on a house, trying to get it ready for sale. And this morning, I worked on painting a deck, at least starting the project of painting the deck. And I noticed that initially, my mind was very focused on painting the boards, how how much paint was on the brush, being real careful not to splatter, trying to avoid obvious brush marks, trying to avoid getting paint on the masonry. But after a short period of time, the mind starts to drift. And you start having thoughts of, I wonder how long this is going to take. I wonder if I can get done this weekend. Won't people be impressed if I get the whole deck painted this weekend? Those thoughts. And then what came to me was this gesture that we talked about last week when Layman Pang encountered Chiteau, and essentially asked the question, well, what am I if detached from everything else? And Chiteau simply put his hand over Layman Peng's mouth, just like a mother would try to calm a restless child. And then with that image in mind, I could go back to paying attention to painting the boards, trying not to splatter paint, trying not to leave obvious brush marks. The next couplet, grasping nothing, discarding nothing. In every place, there's no hindrance, no conflict. What I do is not thought out. Where I go is unplanned. Suggesting just moving through the day, taking care of the various tasks at hand. Not resisting, taking care of what need be done. The third couplet, who assigns the ranks of vermilion and purple? The hills and mountains' last speck of dust is extinguished. No matter who tries to leave their mark, the hills and dales are not impressed. I was very grateful for James Green's translation there, because the line, the hills and mountains' last speck of dust is extinguished, really threw me for a loop. But who assigns the ranks of vermilion and purple? How do these hierarchies, these human hierarchies that we construct, how do they come about? What meaning do they have? The hills and dales are unimpressed. Certainly in geologic time, all of these distinctions become meaningless. The hills and mountains' last speck of dust is extinguished, meaning that the hills and mountains see things clearly, whereas we get wrapped up in hierarchies, titles, prestige. And we assign certain values to what people do, such that the author of a children's book is assigned sort of a greater ranking in our mind than perhaps the volunteer that just goes and reads that children's book to children at the public library. But both of these activities are necessary. Both of them are full life functioning. And the stress for Layman Pang is on how the task is performed, not what the task may be. And the last two lines are often quoted. My supernatural power and marvelous activity, drawing water and carrying firewood. Collecting firewood and carrying water are prayers that reach the gods. I actually like both of those translations. They complement one another. And often those last two lines are freely translated along the lines of how marvelous, how wonderful, drawing water, chopping wood. You may have heard that quote before. And this is its origin. So I think Layman Pang is not trying to say that all of us should confine ourselves to just these tasks of subsistence. There's a role for people who excel in certain skills. There's a role for people who do various things. But Layman Pang is encouraging us not to get caught up in these hierarchies that we set up, these rankings, these levels of prestige, these titles, these legacies, but just to take care of what comes our way. This may seem a little far afield, but it occurred to me, so I'll share it with you. Last weekend, we went to see a exhibit at the Pulitzer Art Foundation there on Washington Avenue in St. Louis. And it was the artwork of Jenny Jones and also the artwork of some other people who she curated the works of some other artists as well. But the main exhibit was on her artwork. And the title of her show was A Line When Broken Begins Again. A line when broken begins again. And there are some things about Jenny Jones's art that are unusual. One is that we have assigned the race of Black to her as a society, and many Black artists, at least in the last few decades, have been pressured or have felt the impulse themselves to sort of speak for their race, to be political, to talk about the lives and the difficulties of Black people. Jenny Jones has not done that. Her work is highly abstract, as you can see in the samples there. She has followed her own path as an artist. And the person who was interviewing her, in a careful way, sort of asked about this. And Jenny Jones responded very simply. She said, "My ancestors would like me to do what the F I want. My ancestors would like me to be true to my art and to follow my impulse as an artist, not bound by race, Blackness, not bound by politics." So those of you who are in St. Louis, I encourage you to see her exhibit at the Pulitzer. I think it speaks in some way to what we're talking about. She has achieved, in the conventional world, she has achieved success, but did she achieve it because she was aiming for success, paying attention to hierarchies and titles and awards, or did she achieve it because she was taking care of the task at hand, following her artistic impulses to see where they would lead, exploring her life through her art? So I think we'll stop there. How do we get caught up in all of these hierarchies and rankings and prestige? How do we assign importance to various tasks when all of them are necessary? So we'll stop there, and I would just be interested in your response to Layman Pang's little verse and what you make of it. Thank you very much for being here today, and we'll go into breakout rooms at this time.